Hey folks, and welcome on in to the nerdiest podcast you're going to hear today. My name is Dr. Luke Hobson. I'm a senior instructional designer and program manager at MIT. My passion is instructional design, and because of that, I produce quite a bit of content online all about the field. From this podcast, a blog, the YouTube channel, and I just released my latest book called What I Wish I Knew Before Becoming an Instructional Designer. And I consider it my purpose to help you make the online learning experience meaningful for you and for your students. And of course, you can find all my information over at drlukehobson.com. Today's episode, folks, it is a solo show. You are just getting me. But I want to pose to you this question that I asked on LinkedIn as well as our Facebook group called the Instructional Design Institute Community. And I asked, is instructional design a form of art? And it was so interesting to see how many responses came about. And this ended up inspiring this entire podcast episode, as well as the blog that does accompany it as well. So if you would rather read along with what I'm going to say, I am reading this over from the link that's down below in the show notes right now. So where did this idea come from? If you were to ask an instructional designer to describe their job, you'll hear about designing the online learning experience, collaborating with subject matter experts, developing products, and creating learning outcomes, objectives, assessments, and content. One phrase that you won't hear about is how artistic the instructional design role can be. While I've always had this preliminary thought, it wasn't until working on a recent project where the light bulb went off over my head. Instructional design to me is artistic in nature, and here is how I arrived at this conclusion. I was tasked with reviewing multiple courses on leadership that were all designed to train the next up-and-coming leaders in tech. The goal was to create a common thread between them to weave together the ultimate tech leadership program. And as I began to review each module, I was stunned by how many amazingly different the courses were designed. Each one of them had their own unique flair that set them apart from the rest. This does make sense as there were at least 4 instructional designers that I can think of who were involved in designing all of the courses. Each designer brought their own creativity to the table along with ideas from subject matter experts, or as you probably know them better as SMEs. While every course followed MIT's guidelines and best practices for online learning, they were still purposefully distinct to showcase the goals of each course. Before long, I became excited to see what was in store for me, pretending to be the learner and going through this journey, and this is what prompted me to write this post. And it said, one thing that seems to surprise new instructional designers is how artistic our jobs are. I guarantee that if 2 instructional designers were put on the same project, working with the same SME, they would design the learning experience differently. This doesn't mean that one experience is right and one is wrong. While we follow best practices in research, instructional designers thrive in creativity. It's what makes this field so exciting. When I wrote this, I was envisioning what would happen if I was a designer on each project. How would I design the learning experience differently? Would my partnerships with the SMEs lead to other different types of ideas? Would my background enhance an assignment because I've had experience in the field that I was trying to design the course around? If you presented to me the same circumstances with the goals, the problems, the content, and whoever the SME is, I bet that my learning experience would be different compared to my peers. Not that one way is right and one way is wrong, once again, but rather our experiences as designers are reflected onto our courses. You project yourself into your designs. I also have to acknowledge that restraints will play an enormous factor into how a program is designed. If you give me all of the time, budget, resources, and a fantastic SME, the design will absolutely be different compared to a tight deadline, a shoestring budget, limited resources, and an unenthusiastic person to work with. For new instructional designers, I know that this is a baffling topic. You hear about best practices, recommended software, learning sciences, and so on. I'm not discounting any of those concepts as they do come into play and they will, in fact, influence our decisions. But let's do a bit of a mental exercise here. Imagine for a second that I give you a blank canvas, some paint, and a few brushes. I provide instructions to paint for me a beautiful New England fall scene. What comes to mind when I say this? Maybe an image of apple picking, pumpkins, red, orange, and yellow leaves, the mountains, corn mazes, or something else. Whatever you decide to create, that is your perspective. You have a mental range of what you are thinking about, and anything that falls, no pun intended, into this category can be deemed as a fall scene. Now take this concept and think about it like an instructional designer. Your blank canvas is the course. Your paint set is the learning outcomes. Your brushes are the learning objectives. What you decide to paint, quote unquote, will become the product. Your SMEs and colleagues in this metaphor serve as the art critics and art teachers. Their feedback becomes incorporated to create a final masterpiece. So what does this look like in a real-world setting? Let's say that the SME and yourself, you both decide that it would be a good idea to include a discussion element in the course to help make the learners network together. How do you envision this discussion taking place? Based on your resources, the target audience, and your limitations, this could look drastically different. You could create a virtual space for learners to connect and gather town, a mobile-friendly platform like Slack for your learners to connect in their own private channels, or perhaps a professional networking environment like a LinkedIn group, or a sophisticated discussion platform with upvoting, sharing, and liking like with YellowDig, or maybe designated breakout rooms with Zoom or another video-based platform, or perhaps you're just going to use the tried, true, and standard discussion board within the LMS itself. The correct answer depends on a number of circumstances, but this could be one step in the right direction. And I didn't even get into the kind of activity you could create around the concept of networking. I only mentioned a variety of platforms for a designer to think about when it comes to the purpose and functionality of networking within the program. Your creativity levels will need to multiply when thinking about assessments for a course, and I'd argue that this is where the artistic form truly happens. What kind of assessment will be relevant, engaging, and appropriate for the target audience and the goals of the course? Think of assessment items like peer-reviewed activities, scenario-based, problem-based, project-based, gamification, simulations, presentations, team-based, or case studies. And the list goes on and on. Those are just a few I came up with at the top of my head. But that's what makes instructional design role challenging and fun at the same time. You mix and match these ideas to create the learning experience. Let's say that my goal of a networking activity is to have the learners become more comfortable with networking online, and they will practice this skill to be used in their own organizations and professions. From experience, I know that networking in the workplace is complex, especially with massive organizations. To help learners practice this networking skill and to become more comfortable with talking to one another in the course, I could create a scenario-based problem. In the scenario, I'd ask learners to imagine themselves in the shoes of a character who is trying to lead a change at their organization. In order for this change to manifest, they need the buy-in from influential coworkers. In the scenario, the character identifies who these coworkers are and tries a variety of methods to connect with them. The prompt will then ask the learner to describe what they think will be the most effective way to network and why. Once they have their answer, they move into the Slack channel, introduce themselves, and then describe their opinion on efficient ways to network within the workplace. This is only one way to do this activity, but there are essentially an infinite amount of ways of making a networking activity become reality. Maybe as I was just talking and describing the activity, you had your own ideas of what will work better for your circumstances. And that's the beauty of it all. My way was right for my learners, the goals that I set, and the platform. Your way could be different, yet far better for your learners. You know them better than I do. For all of these reasons, this is why instructional design is artistic to me. Now go out there and create some masterpieces. So those are my thoughts, but what do you think? Share this podcast episode on LinkedIn or Facebook, tag me in it, and tell me about your thoughts. To you, is instructional design a form of art? I'd love to hear more about what you think with everything and just how different our field really is. And that's what makes everything so cool and interesting at the end of the day. It's been a while since we have done a Q&A episode, and I would love to do another one. So folks, send over to me your questions. You can write in at luke@drlukehobson.com, or of course you can send me over a message on Facebook or on LinkedIn. Be sure to pick up a copy of my book if you haven't yet already. You can find the ebook version at theinstructionaldesignbook.com, or you can head on over to Amazon, type in the title, What I Wish I Knew Before Becoming an Instructional Designer, and it's going to pop up with both the physical option and the Kindle option as well. As always, give this podcast episode a 5-star rating wherever you are listening. Those reviews truly do help out the show. But that is all I have for you today, folks. Stay nerdy out there, and I'll talk to you next time.